All right, so good morning. It is December the 19th today, and we are going to the backside of chapter 11 of John and the first section of chapter 12 of John. We're going to move right past, again, we did, those that missed, the raising of Lazarus. And we did a pretty good job of looking at that last week, both in the class and in the pulpit. We ended up using that story.
I need one, Louis.
But let's, beginning in verse 45, this is the aftermath of Christ raising Lazarus from the dead. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to look at how the disciples and how the Jews and the Pharisees respond to this miracle that was really climaxing Jesus revealing of who he is. And then chapter 12 really begins Passion Week, with Christ going the triumphal entry, and then from there on everything happens. Which by the way, you just think about how all the other Gospels are structured. Mark, you've got 16 chapters. The first 8 chapters talk about the ministry of Jesus to his disciples and to the world. And then the last 8 chapters are all Passion Week from there on, what happened in the last week. It's exactly 50-50. We've got the same thing here in John's Gospel. We've got 21 chapters, 11 chapters, are everything leading up to Passion Week, and then the last 10 chapters are the last week. So the gospel writers understood that what Christ came to do at the cross was all about why he was here. And the first half of it was to establish who he was, because what he did at the cross doesn't have any more meaning than a good man tragically being condemned and killed for something he didn't deserve to be killed for. A martyr, basically. A good man, a good teacher being martyred because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Society and culture didn't want it. And that's all that it would be, unless you understood that he was God in the flesh. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That he was all the 7 I ams that John takes all this care to present him as. He, before Abraham was, I am. He's God in the flesh. And that he's the Lamb of God, the Good Shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And every Jew would know that sin is not removed except for the shedding of blood, because they did it daily. They brought lambs, goats, bulls, sheep, and oxen daily for the sin offering, the peace offering, the blood offering, the atonement. And Christ here culminates all of that with the beginning of it, the meal, the night before he goes, which we call the Last Supper, right? This bread is represented in my body, which is broken for you. This cup of wine is representative of the blood that is going to be shed for you. He's saying that I am that sacrifice that's going to end all sacrifices. So, as we turn this corner here, going towards and into chapter 12, now we've seen enough, and just as they have been with him now for 3 years. This is the 3rd Passover, and enough to see for him to establish and declare who he was, that he was from God. From the very beginning, John the Baptist, whose one and only purpose was to witness to and declare that this man is the one that's from God. and all other need for all other prophecies. There's no more waiting. God is with us, and he's among us. You can see him face to face. Where is he? You can put it on your GPS, and you can take it right, and it'll take you right to where he's at. We have a location. He's here. He's born in Nazareth of Galilee, and he's, you know, and wherever. And by the time he gets to the end of 3 years, just follow the crowds, and that's, you're going to see him. Even the governors and the magistrates looked for opportunities to hear him because of the things that they'd heard about him. By the end of that, here's a man now that's not only feeding, you know, over 10,000 plus people, the wind and the waves, walking on the water, multiplying as he did, but now raising the dead, raising a dead man. And like we said last week, this is the beginning. Raising the Lazarus now is the beginning of we're done. It's all over. We're gonna kill him. It's just a matter of now. Let's decide how we're gonna do it. We need to get rid of him. And then began to conspire about how they're gonna get rid of him.
That was the last straw.
It was the last straw. And what is ironic about that? What is the last miracle? Bringing a dead man back to life. You know, which you'd have to equate that with God, because you have to be the one that gave life in order to give life where there's no life. You have to be the giver of life because there's no life there to resuscitate. And God made it surely an appointed there that, and John's gospel makes it clear from his description of what happened that there's no way this was a resuscitation. They made it past the 3-day period of you know, rigor mortis and embalmment and decomposition, which had begun, and now we're into the 4th day. So he would be into decomposition by then.
So he had to be physically restored also.
That's right. Well, yeah, not only did life have to be brought back into his body, but yes, the body would have had to have been healed, undergo.
You know, it also says nobody ever spoke like him.
Yes.
Like nobody. You know, because he spoke with authority, and it said they never heard anybody speak like this. You know, that'd be something to hear.
And that is, well, on the one hand, they couldn't answer him because with the authority came answers that they weren't able to recant or with their own theology and with their whatever their stock answer was for that issue and that problem. They weren't not able to answer him. They didn't have answers for that. But still, you would think that too would make them to want to hear more. Well, then what about this? You know, if that's true and if that's the way it is, then what happened over here? What about that? And then I think that was probably what's going on when he was 12 years old in the temple. You know, the Pharisees and scribes were asking a question. He had answers for everything they didn't have answers for, and it got to where they were sitting down quiet, listening to this 12-year-old boy, who spoke like Ernie says with authority, even while he's just physically a kid. When it came to representing the Father as he did and knowing the Father. Those that had an ear to hear and a heart that was hungry for God would have listened and would have stuck around to at least ask more questions. Those who did not want to hear, and this is what's happening here, and what we're getting here to today, and what's probably the main gist of what we're going to see here today is how the message and the person of Jesus is going to divide between the believer and the unbeliever, the sheep and the goat, those who want him and those who don't want him. It's going to be exposed. And that's really what the gospel does. The person of Christ exposes where a man is in his terms of his relation to God. Those who want him will abandon everything else to find him and get him. Those who don't want him will find every reason to reject him. And the false, even the false religion that you have to which religion does, it falsely, it has a way of falsely soothing our conscience to say, we're still not so bad for God. We still consider God. We still consider God's way. We still agree that murder, rape, and mayhem and all that is wrong. It's evil and wrong. They did admit that they were guilty of those things, but they would still have an outward allegiance to the laws of God, while but as Christ said, quoting Isaiah, their hearts far from it, far from Him.
So when they asked Jesus historical questions, let's say, he could say, yeah, I was there. I'm sure he did it, but you know what I mean? Yeah, I know what he wrote. I inspired it, and
Right.
oh yeah, I was there when they crossed the Red Sea.
In a sense, he did. When the answers he gave were just like that. Well, think of like John chapter 3, when Moses raised up that serpent in the wilderness, and he's explaining what's going on there, as if he was there, and as if because he's explaining the spiritual import of those events. And he does it again and again when he talked about divorce. The same thing. Moses did that because of the hardness of your hearts. You know, and of course this was generations before the people he's talking to, and he's talking to them as if they were there and doing the same thing. Because you were going to get divorced one way or the other. You were going to do you were going to do it either way anyways. You didn't want God's way. You wanted a way to legitimize from God what you wanted to do. You just, because covenant love wasn't in your heart. How could you give covenant love to another human being when you didn't receive covenant love from God as your Father? And so he did speak in that manner with that kind of authority, explaining the scriptures because of the spiritual truth that's behind all of that. So this really exposes not only the Pharisees, because the Pharisees refused Jesus' authority. It put their job was on the line, because they enjoyed the notoriety of people looking to them as having all the answers, because they were the scribes and they were the Pharisees whose job was to teach the scriptures. This is what God said. So when people wanted to know what God's dictates were on whatever was in their life that was going on, who did they go to? They went to us. And Jesus is there exposing the fact that they're so far from God. They've got all of the things that the pagans have in their hearts. And he goes on, as we saw in chapter 8, you are of your father the devil. Verse 45. Okay, let's have somebody read here. Verse 45 to the end, 57. Okay, you want to do that? Nice and loud.
Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here's this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. "You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the desert, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went out from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus, and as they stood in the temple area, they asked one another, "What do you think? Isn't he coming to the feast at all?" But the chief priests and Pharisees had given orders that if anyone found out where Jesus was, he should report it so that they might arrest him.
Okay. Well, they were intending to arrest him the next time they met, no matter what happened. Of course, what happened the next time he came into Jerusalem? How did he enter into Jerusalem?
Hosanna,
As a king.
Palm Sunday.
Palm Sunday.
Mhm.
And he had a whole parade of people worshiping him, calling him the Son of David, Hosanna, the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And they knew where that came from. That's a quote from, what's it? There was Psalm 118 and there was Zechariah also going on there. That he was in fulfillment of all that. They were recognizing him as the king who was from the line of David, who was going to sit on David's throne and rule and reign forever. Boy, the Pharisees understood what that was. But because of the people, the crowds, and all those that were following, imagine all those that ever had followed him through the miracles that he had done, were all there that day. They had to back off and not arrest him that day. So, because he was being lauded and brought in as king of the Jews.
Right. I read one time that tradition says that on that particular day of the year in the temple, Psalm 24 was read. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lifted up, the everlasting doors of the King of Glory might come in. While, you know, on the same day that Jesus was entering Jerusalem like that.
Yep.
That's
yep.
so cool.
That would be. That would be. Who is this King of Glory? The Lord our God. And even they, when you think about that psalm, even that psalm recognizes deity in the Messiah. The Messiah who they're waiting for to come from David's seed is called the Lord of Hosts. He is the King of Glory. So there's deity equated to the coming King, the Messianic King, in the Psalms. It's unmistakable. And if you don't think that, you either have to understand that and receive that and open your mind and heart to that, or close your heart to that. You can't reject him and believe that he is the Lord God, the Son of God in the flesh, the King of the Jews, and then plot to kill him. They have to reject that. I don't care what, and it's probably more of this. I don't care whether it's true or not. It's not going to be true here, as long as we have something to say about it.
There was over 300 prophecies fulfilled of Jesus.
Yep. Yep. So they're rejecting the whole wealth of it, and God left no. Not only about creation, you could say like Romans 1, creation itself witnesses who he is, so that all men are without excuse. But the Jews particularly, they had the scriptures, they had the promises of the Messiah, and that the Messiah would be the Son of God. I just read, I'm in Isaiah now in my own devotion. I just read 9 and 10 yesterday, and you know that. For unto us a son is born, a child is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And I was reading this one here, this is the NRSV, New Revised Standard Version, and just another one that I'm really enjoying, the devotional, I get a devotional Bible, Classics devotion. I'm going to read something out of that too before we go. And it said, instead of the word government, the government will be upon his shoulders, and all nations and all governments will flock to him. He uses the word authority, which is interesting. I've got to go back and see what the Hebrew word is there and see where exactly what that, because there are two different words. But this translation uses all authority will be on his shoulders, and all the nations will be flocking under his authority. Well, that's interesting. Well, that really tells it like it is, because he is David's throne and the king, all kingship, a king reigns and rules. He has authority over all. And that's one. And then it goes on to say, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Prince of Peace. Everlasting Father, oh, we almost forgot that one. He's Father and he's Son at the same time. And King and Prince at the same time, at the one at the same time.
I thought it was interesting here, their main charge, you know, in this passage. You know, this man is performing many miracles and signs. And then they go, if this continues, then they go political then. We're going to lose our nation and our positions here. They didn't say he's being blasphemous. You know.
Right.
So therefore, because he's performing all these miracles and signs, and it's not going to be good for us politically, we got to kill him.
Right.
So in an abbreviated version, you know, of what their conspiracy, what was behind it, and what they wanted to do about it. Like that one person said, if you're in a group of people who are plotting on murdering someone, you might be in a wrong group, a bad group.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, a lot of, well, that, who was it, Bonhoeffer, that was part of a murder,
Yep.
yeah. And it might have been a righteous cause. Hitler was killing millions. But there's then that question of, you know, if it's self-defense, no question about it.
Yeah.
You have the obligation to, especially when it's the lives of other people. But a murder plot, you really have to, that has to be declared, something declared by the Lord, like he declares war on the Philistines, or and go take them out, or when they went into Canaan, take out all those lands and don't leave one left standing. So, but yeah, a murder plot, the taking of life is into God's hands, and it's up to God whether he's going. God does use other men as instruments for that. Capital punishment, for example, is
Execution.
solidly biblical. You know, those who try to make it otherwise, you know, you're not seeing it. It's in the Scripture. Yes,
It's
it
the
can
only
be
commandment.
abused,
It's
you
the
know.
only commandment that's in the first 5 books, is execution.
Yeah.
It's mentioned in all 5 of the Pentateuch.
But what that verse you pointed out, where
Yeah.
what exactly
Where
was
he said, here is this man performing many miracles, miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away our place and our nation. So it won't be good politically for us or the nation if this man continues doing miraculous signs.
that is probably the most important.
And people are going to believe in him.
Now, we talk about, you know, this is where the plot began with his execution and his arrest and leading to his execution. And that verse that you brought up there,
Really murder.
that's the pivotal void. Here's where we're revealing what the heart and the mind is of these guys. So let's talk about this a second. What is it? Is this going to stay? What is it that they want, and what is it that they don't want? What is it that they're unwilling to receive and to come to?
They don't want to give up their power and
Okay,
authority.
they don't want to give up their power, their authority. They have an agenda, whether it's political. It is partly political. It's positional. It's this is my territory. This is my authority. This is what you know, your realm. It's like, now apply this. And when you think about what's going on here, every single one of us who comes to Christ and God is knocking on the door of your heart, we all have the same thing. You talk about, no room at the inn, you know, at the birth of Christ, and is there room at the inn with you? You know, do you have room? Are you going to let him in or not let him in? And this is what's going on here. What's going on here? What is going on here that's personal? I'm not willing to give up my control of me, and that upsets me. It doesn't matter how good, right, and true that the other thing is over here that wants my attention and it wants my allegiance. That's not what's the key here. The key here is well, that means I'm going to have to give up control of me. And what you're saying is, I can do a better job of running my life than you can. Thank you. Thanks anyway. You're saying, and what the Jews and the Pharisees are saying, we can do a better job. We know what the kingdom needs. We know what our nation needs better than God does. Thanks anyway.
In their defense, I want to play devil's advocate for a minute. Losing our place, the NIV says that means the temple. You can kind of understand in a way, you know, that the temple was destroyed, you know, and they went during, you know, the Babylonian invasion, and then they were taken away, and then they came back and rebuilt it. So they're probably thinking back to that a little bit too, and thinking that they're going to lose the temple, but it sounds almost like at that point the temple and temple services become almost an idol.
That's
Because
exactly
it's more
true.
important
Right.
to them
Right.
than relationship with God.
And if you have the relationship with God, and that's the most important thing in your heart and your life, you're willing to give up everything else in order to get that and not to lose that. And that's the thing. And that also goes back to Isaiah, that that their love of the things then becomes, when that supersedes the love of God, whose glory should fill the temple. And that, by the way, when you think about that, that's what defined Isaiah's ministry, is what happened to him in chapter 6. The glory of God filled the temple. That turned everything around. It doesn't matter what the temple is, where it is, or what is it. The fact is that when God shows up in His presence there, it wipes everything else away. Everything else away is incidental and insignificant in comparison to the light of the glory of God in the face of Christ that fills everything. So not to want that is the worst sin of all. And I heard a statement like that take it over into preaching. You know, I think it was Leonard Ravenhill that said the worst sin of all isn't it's not murder or rape or sex or incest or anything. The worst sin of all is I can manage my own life by myself, and I don't need you. That's the ultimate. It is idolatry. It's placing something else other than which is self and self on the throne, and it really describes exactly what Satan's whole purpose and heart is. I will be God, and I will. There isn't any room for the real God to come here in this place. So that is absolutely critical. That verse that Ernie put in here, showed up in here, is exactly what is the critical thing. And that's why we said this passage next to the next paragraph that comes with Jesus being anointed at Bethany are the two opposite, different responses to Christ revealing Himself as He is. They rejected it because they didn't have place for Him. They didn't want what He had to give. 6 days before the Passover, and I don't know how many days after, but it was 3 verses before it said the time of Passover was almost there. Jesus arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus lived, and whom Jesus had raised from the dead. There was a dinner given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those who were reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped His feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of that perfume. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, make sure we name him, who was later to betray Him, that very same one, objected to this display of affection and this pouring out of this hugely expensive. It was about a year's salary of the value of this, more than a year's salary of wages that this jar of ointment cost. And Judas Iscariot was just watching dollar signs pour down out of there. And what does John say? Judas said, why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. There it is right there. And that's why the NIV doesn't just tell you the number of denarii. But he didn't say this, and this is where the gospel writer puts in parentheses to make sure we understand this. It's not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a
Thief, a skimmer.
Right. It doesn't just describe what he did. This is that kind of jumped out to me here. It doesn't just describe. It doesn't just say, well, because he used to pilfer the collection. When God says, "Thou shalt not," and then you do what He said, "Thou shalt not," that makes you a, if it's adultery, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," and you do it anyway, you are an adulterer. If if you take what doesn't belong, or you covet what doesn't belong, you are a thief. So it names the person according to the sin. That's it. You are identified by what you do because it's what comes out of the heart. He didn't say this. Let's go down to verse 7. "Leave her alone." Jesus replied, "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You'll always have the poor among you, but you'll not always have me." What is more important, the temple or the glory of God that fills the temple? What is more important, the value of the temple, the gold that's in the temple, or the blood sacrifice that's on the altar? And the God that is there who wants to have fellowship and restoration and relationship between the worshiper and himself, whose glory oversees and fills the temple. You've lost that. You've lost the whole meaning and reason for the tabernacle and all those instruments and pieces of furniture and everything in the temple, that it was all about God and His presence. That stuff, that all of these other things, that whether it's the candlestick or the altar, the golden altar of incense, or even the Ark of the Covenant, all of these things, Hebrews 9 and 10 says, are mere shadows of the real presence of God and glory. They're mere shadows. They're just physical representations of the reality of who God is. And if you've missed that and you don't, you have, I don't care if it, yes, and he's just saying it's good to feed the poor. You've always got that. We're not taking away your opportunity to do good to the poor, if that's your goal. But you don't always have me. And what is more important but that all of, and what, again, he's elevating himself to who he is. Who is more important and what is more important than God with us? And if God's there with us, He is way more important than 20 million vials of pure nard, if they were here. That it would all become meaningless and insignificant if you knew who it was that was there for that. So that these two passages set next to each other show and set the stage for Jesus going to the cross, which was his plan and his purpose, God's plan and what Christ came for to do. And it shows the only two options that every man has, religious or not. That he's either everything and will be everything, or you'll miss him altogether. And the only reason not to accept, with all of the evidence that has come for who he is that self and your right to yourself is more important than you wanting to know the God who made you for nothing else other than to have a relationship with him. Now, let me just read something real quick and we'll go. This is something that it's just a tiny little devotional that I thought was so cool, and it's out of Isaiah. It's alongside of Isaiah 7:14. The virgin shall conceive and give birth to a son, and he shall be called Emmanuel, God with us. And this is just a little story here that I thought really kind of poignantly puts us together from a guy named E. Stanley Jones. It says, there was a little boy stood before the picture of his absent father. And then the boy was gazing at the picture with his dad and his mom and himself on the mantle. Turned to his mother and wistfully said, I wish Father could step right out of that picture. This little boy expressed the deepest yearning of the human heart. We who have gazed upon the picture of God in nature are grateful, but not satisfied. We want our Father to step out of the impersonal picture and meet us as a person. The human heart is personal and wants a personal response. Why won't principles do? Why do we need a personal God? Someone asks. Well, suppose you go to a child crying for its mother and you say, "Don't cry, little child. I'm giving to you the principle of motherhood." Would the tears dry and the face light up? Hardly. The child would brush aside your principles of motherhood and cry for its mother. We all want not a principle nor a picture, but a person. The Father has stepped out of the picture. The Word has become flesh. John 1:14. That's the meaning of Christmas. Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. He's the personal approach from the unseen. We almost gasp as the picture steps out of the frame. I look at the character and life of Jesus, and I know what God's character is like, and I too must become the Word made flesh. And we close with this prayer. Gracious Father, as Thou hast stepped out of this picture, help me today to step out of the picture and let someone see in me the meaning of a Christian. In Jesus' name. Amen.
We're not having class the next 2 weeks, right? So we'll be gone.
Yeah, so
We're
next
traveling.
2 weeks, because of Christmas being, the day after Christmas being next week, and then we're gone New Year's Eve. We'll be down in Tennessee, so we'll see you on
Next year.
See you
next year.
Yeah. Please,